I'm ahead of the curve, also known as James Bergman, and in today's discussion I am talking with Derek Lambert of the MythVision Podcast. In this discussion, myself and Derek discuss the origins and psychology of religion. We also discuss death, apologetics, arguments against and for God, and atheism. If you enjoy this video, please remember to leave a like and share wherever you can, where you think other people might find some interest in it, and of course subscribe if you're new to the channel, and leave a comment as well, because I really want to hear what you guys have to say about the contents of the discussion. If you additionally want to support this channel, please visit my Patreon, where there are exclusive benefits and you get early access to videos as well. With this out of the way, let's begin the video. Derek, thanks for coming on the podcast. It's really good to see you. I love your channel. One thing that I notice is that you work really hard at what you do. I mean, that's indisputable. I mean, the amount of videos that you post every week, and the quality as well as quantity, to be fair, which is the hardest combination. I just want to congratulate you on that. I mean, that's a pretty steep task. Could you go into how you started your YouTube channel and your, how you've come to have more strength in atheism rather than theism, and kind of your introduction to the subject of philosophy and studying theism as well?
Yeah, so I would say, first off, MythVision started off because I had an interest in particular ideas and videos that I'd seen out there on the YouTube web, if you will, that I wanted to see more of. And I was like, there's not enough of this, so I want to talk to the people that I've heard say stuff on this to dive deeper. And this was a hobby. I never had intentions on this being a full-time job. I was working construction actually at a company called HBC, and I was a supervisor running a renewable energy, and I was dealing with heavy equipment, installing solar panels on farms in North Carolina. So I was just a country boy, just out there in the country, and I'd listen in my headphones to a podcast and my mind would blow. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's interesting. But I was a theist still, or at least transitioning kind of between theism and like pantheism, like really where do these lines absolutely stop, and how can you know? And I just started to think God in a bigger sense, because I was always a Christian my whole life. And I say fundamentalist, non-denominational. Then I kind of was in like Calvary Chapel type of Christianity. Then I became more Reformed, going towards Orthodoxy and studying eschatology, which is ultimately what got me in trouble. I'll put it that way, because the second coming of Jesus was an issue when you actually start focusing on it. So that led me to be ostracized by the Christian community and treated kind of like a lone wolf because of my ideas theologically studying the New Testament. And when I did that, I had the freedom to explore things I never had. So then as I explored things that I had never had that freedom in my mind, and I was scared, because you're taught, certain things in Christianity, you go outside of that, or you're not believing in the right thing, there's repercussions. And I didn't want to be wrong. I like to want to try and be accurate. So the reason why I would say I'm an atheist today, and what made me go this direction, is I stopped assuming that something is the case until I had better data or evidence too. So I know it sounds like an easy cop-out, because people are like, atheism is really an easy position. It really is, because it's asserting like, no, give me proof, like give me the fact, give me the evidence. I'll believe it. No problem. Like if I have the proof, if I see or know that there's a God, I'm not one of those atheists who has like this, you know what, I'd rebel against him. No, I would imagine that if God is greater than us, that God would have greater morals than us too. So then like maybe all this could make sense in the grand scheme of things, all the evil that is out there and the bad, and who knows. But I'm an atheist because I started actually using a scientific method in every field, not just in studies of biology or in studies of this. It was like, hold on, like, is that justifiably something I can hold to? And why should I believe? God started looking more anthropomorphized. And what I mean by that in my term is that they looked more like humans. And that's because they really are. And so I started going, oh my God, so God's not outside space and time. See, I took a different path than the philosophical one. Because to me, when I hear philosophers often, and I talk to friends who are big into this, you can wiggle anything out of philosophy if you try hard enough. This is something like, if you're really skilled in philosophy and you know rhetoric, you know how you can make polytheism legit, you can make monotheism legit, you can make atheism legit, you can make pantheism, you can make your positions make sense and be logical and not find inherent contradictions within them. You can do it if you're smart enough and you know how to do it philosophically. I took the historical approach. So that's what ultimately led me to go, these all look man-made. Like, why are we getting into philosophy? Because I could do that all day long. The people in the Bible were not concerned with any of these philosophical concepts that you guys are discussing. The people in Hinduism had none of this. They didn't need this. They didn't want this. So why are we going to this? Because the mysteries we once thought, God is the reason the volcano erupts, and then the earthquakes, and the lightning is the thunderbolt of Zeus, or whatever. God becomes further, once we have falsified the claim, we know that it's not Zeus throwing lightning bolts. We know magnetic fields in the core of the earth and the mantle. We know tectonic plates shift, causing earthquakes or mountains to rise or volcanoes to erupt. It's not Yahweh. It's not Zeus. It's not Asherah. It's not whatever the name of the gods might be. Then those gods have to be pushed into an unfalsifiable area outside space. And you got to make them go to the mystery that we don't know because you don't want to let go. And I said, I'm tired of playing that game. I'm tired of protecting God, who shouldn't need our protection. Because if God exists, this should be something, I think, that this God would want everyone to know, according to what Christians say. And it's all like masked in issues. There's so many issues. So,
yeah, I mean, you touched on a few things there, and you mentioned the historical approach, which of course is, your channel MythVision is quite literally a reference to elements of history and how myth, of course, religion, or we could even go to archetypes and things like that, how that manifests in society, and then what it actually becomes, right? And religion is stemming from that. You also mentioned, you don't hate God. Like, you're not, is that correct? Like, you don't have this misotheist sort of attitude. Like,
no.
What do you think about misotheism? Do you think that it's kind of, I don't know, more of a militant atheist, new atheists kind of idea where, well, Nietzsche, I guess you could say, hated God in some respect, or at least its followers, especially. We hear of people who hate God. If God existed, we would hate him because of all the suffering in the world. Let's say that's one reason, and a powerful reason at that. But why is it that you don't hate God? Is it sort of because if the definition of God is true, it would therefore follow that, well, there would be no reason to hate him because he's benevolent by nature. Is that the angle that you take there?
What's funny is I don't believe God exists. I don't even assume God exists. And I don't have anything to be angry at other than the perception of what God is. And that is a reflection of the men, and I say men, who are saying this God exists. So like, I have no reason with my historical approach and things I've learned. What am I angry at? I'd be angry at men, actually, if anything, because the men who wrote these books and are saying, thus saith the Lord, it's really these men. This God does not exist. I'm convinced this God doesn't exist. So in my mind, if I hypothetically assume God exists, right? None of this makes sense to me. And maybe we die and we go before this God and he's like, dude, because this is I even told a theist this recently. I talked to Christian apologists, all these people. I'm friends with everybody, I said, honestly, the world is so crazy that if we died and there was a God, I imagine, my imagination, that's exactly what God is to me, is the imagination and perception of men. My perception would be, if this thing is that as sophisticated as all the philosophers want to try and make out to be, that we die and we come before, and he's like, what'd you think about that game I just had you go in? That's about the best I can imagine, because he'd be like, you think I cared about the little, what you ate and what day you thought about me? I am beyond this fickle little nonsense that you mortals thought. And you guys, I heard it once said by a Christian apologist, Ravi Zacharias. I used to listen to that guy. I didn't know what the ending was coming of this guy. But anyway, I used to listen to him. And he had a famous saying where he said, if Jesus was here today in modern America and he healed a guy that was blind, he took some mud, he rubbed it in his eyes, and the guy's like, oh, I can see, Then he takes no mud, just places his hand on the next guy and heals him. Humans would have two separate cults. One were the Muddites and the anti-Muddites, okay? It is literally evolution 101. But the point is we are the ones making the big deals out of all of this stuff. We observe natural phenomenon. When certain astrological signs come up, we create our calendars, special holy days, the whole nine. And I imagine that if there is a being that is what we call God, and I'm using a personal pronoun of he, because I'm so used to the Bible's reference here, that he would be laughing at us as soon as we wake up after dying. We're like, what the? And he's like, you forgot everything we were talking about before. How do you enjoy? I'm playing hypothetical here, but what am I angry at other than, honestly, I would say it's probably undereducation or ignorance on our part as humans, and people with these particular religious views harming others. So at worst, it would be the identity of these perceptions, these religious perceptions that are put onto other people. That, I think, is what you're talking about when we say people who are militant atheists. They're not I'm not going to say they wouldn't say, yeah, I'd hate God, because if there was, they're hypothetically assuming as well, if there was a God, what happened to my Aunt Janice? What happened? Why I have cancer? Why that person cannibalized or raped or whatever? They would go, why did you, I cannot like you. I would hate you for making a world like this. I mean, I guess in the hypothetical sense, you could hypothetically create a hate for something that you imagine. But if reality is what it is, and it just is, brute fact, harsh, and we have to make the best out of what we have, am I going to hate existence? I don't have hate for existence. It sucks sometimes, but that's what I think we as what we call life, as something that is a living, conscious being, have to suffer and struggle through. And I want to make the best. Can I cuss on here?
Go for it.
Okay. If we have chicken shit, I want to make chicken salad. Okay. That's the best I want to do. Anyway.
All right. Yeah, no, I think a lot of that, it's really interesting about the hate versus kind of, because some people, I'm a non-resistant non-believer, and I think that, if God did exist under the definition, if we're going to hypothetically, agree on a definition, and we're going to be like, yeah, sure, that definition suits, i.e. God is benevolent, I wouldn't be against that, because you'd then have to assume that everything that God does, his will, would be for a good reason. Now, I don't think we have justifiable evidence to say that it does. And if we did, then I really do want to know what that is, because I'm wondering why insects were, conjured to eat the eyeballs of children, as Stephen Fry, famously said in that one interview, which I don't know, a part of me feels like he regrets sometimes, because so many people bring it up to him. And a lot of this, I think, and I think divine hiddenness is one of the biggest issues for me, when it comes to God's existence, because like you say, why would God want to be vague? Why would God want to be so hidden from us? And the answer to that is, well, maybe he's got a good reason, but that, many reasons have been put forward. And I think overall I would agree with you, because we're both atheists and we both are not convinced of this. And I really just struggle. I struggle to be convinced of a theist when they say, hey, look, the child that is 6 years old and is dying, from starvation, hey, look, that they're going to go to a better place. They're going to be recompensated. I mean, to me, that's an inhuman conclusion as much as it is, a motivation of some kind of divine plan. I find that to be quite hideous.
Yeah.
I mean, do you think divine hiddenness is one of the best arguments against God? Would you say
it's up there? I mean, it's like I could tell you that leprechauns actually, exist, and they're actually out there, and they're gifting certain people with good things, but they also slaughter and kill others. And like you'd be like, come on, leprechauns, no, or whatever the analogy is, and we've never seen one. People believe they've seen Bigfoot. People believe they've been abducted by UFOs. People believe Jesus has visited them. People believe that Elvis has visited them.
In Toast as well.
In Toast, the whole nine. But I do think that the divine hiddenness, the problem is, and this goes back to unfalsifiability, is like you can't falsify God's existence. You can, in particular examples of God. If we start talking about biblical deities and whatnot, you can at least make good cases for why it's false or shouldn't be believed. And I can make a case right now that if we wanted to grant, you talked about this just earlier, mentioning, why God isn't showing himself or is hiding and things like that. Jesus himself in the Gospel of Mark, which every single gospel is different. And I mean, textually, theologically, intentionally, what they're trying to say is different, a different picture of Jesus, the whole nine. But in Mark, the whole gospel is the secret identity of who Jesus is. Who do men say that I am? Like, the whole reason Mark was written is to tell you about this Son of God, Son of Man, Jesus, who nobody recognized. They didn't know who he was. And every time he did a miracle or whatever, he'd be like, shh, don't tell anybody. And then there's a point when he says, I speak in parables so they don't understand. He doesn't want people to understand. And in one of the other gospels, he says this prayer that's like recorded in it. Father, I thank you that you did not reveal these things to them. Now, Christians who talk about God wanting, because they read 2 Peter, everyone to be saved. He desires everyone to be saved. That's literally weird that you would say that when Jesus himself is glad that God did not reveal certain things to people lest they repent and turn from their sins. He didn't want them to. It's almost like if Jesus knew that Judas was going to betray him, and he could have sat him down and said, hey, listen, when this happens at this point, don't fall for it. Well, it's fate, right? Or one might argue that. He had to be the one who betrayed and then commits suicide and dies. Like, there's so many different aspects that come into this. My point is if you want to take the argument, God's hiding himself for a bigger scheme, or this is a test or whatever, it's a cruel one. And then you have to say, if you're an atheist, we get back to that anti-theistic argument. Is this a God worth worshiping? Is this a God actually worth believing in, when God might be playing this cruel joke purposefully on your family or one of your loved ones so that they don't believe? But for you, oh, you're special. And I had to wrestle with this question does this mean I love people more than God? Because I wouldn't have done that. I would have just made heaven to begin with. But instead of all this suffering, and there's a lot of things. As a Christian, I had to start swallowing that pill because I became a Calvinist. There are words that mean things in the Bible, like God loved Jacob and hated Esau. This is a God who is not only love. This is a God who loves some and hates some. And you can find this in the New Testament and in the Hebrew Bible. So I know the text, I look at the history, I look at the literature, and that's what really made me go, this is just not working, buddy. So this is why, in my opinion, you have sophisticated people like my friend Michael Jones inspiring philosophy. Everything goes into philosophy. If we were to interview right now, you and me, some of these ancient Greek poets, the ones that come at the later end of the Hellenistic age, and we ask them about Zeus and go, all right, so in your text, Zeus comes down and he rapes a woman, meaning he physically forces her into a sexual act, gets her pregnant. Do you think that happened? So I asked Joshua Bowen, I asked Dr. Kip, is biblical slavery actually owning humans and being able to abuse them as long as you don't kill them and things like this? Like, yes, that's the case. If you ask the ancients back in the times, let's say when the Homeric epics were written or whatnot, they just said, Zeus raped her and got her pregnant, and they had a demigod that was birthed from it and all. If you ask the later poets, they tiptoed around it. They were more philosophical. And what did they say? Well, it doesn't mean that. What it meant was, this is like the early church fathers who are interpreting the Hebrew scriptures. What it meant was, it was a foreshadowing of Christ, and like they're sophisticated and, in my opinion, obfuscating the evidence so that their worldview matches their ethics. They don't want it to be dumb and stupid. They don't want biblical cosmology to be a flat earth with a solid dome over it. They want the Bible to match evolution. They want the Bible to match modern cosmology. And while I give them an A for effort to try and be on par, and I'm glad that they do think science is facts and like there's evidence that we evolved and things like that, I do think that these others are more accurate in the biblical text. And those are the fundamentalist radicals. And so I went that route just to give you a bunch to chew on and throw at you. But philosophy to me has become, and I hate this, I definitely want to dive deeper into philosophy as time goes by, but it's become an escape route for many to have a sophisticated approach on, what they believe so that it makes sense and that it matches modern times. That's my opinion.
Yeah, no, I think you're kind of getting at the idea that it's kind of like, I think of Richard Dawkins's quote, and as much as I criticize New Atheism nowadays, because I used to be a fanboy of New Atheism, and now I've got a special spot for Christopher Hitchens. I mean, who doesn't, right? Yeah, even theists often like Hitchens. But I think that, as Dawkins said, let's be philosophical by all means, but not so philosophical that our brains fall out, right? And so there comes a point, and I've even doubted myself on this, like on views that I have. I'm like, look, am I genuinely getting to the crux of this issue, or am I just over philosophizing this question? And to be completely honest with you, I don't even know what the limit of that is, because how do you determine how far you should go when you philosophize? Yeah, sure, I accept that there are, good arguments for God, not good enough, but I think that there are arguments at least, and they've survived and they haven't been, completely debunked. And so I think that, theism has some kind of level of credibility to some extent, but obviously I think atheism has that weight more so. But I think people like William Lane Craig, and I respect him highly as a thinker and as a theist in apologetics. I think that he's at the top for a reason, because he's very impressive, but he's also very impressive in rhetoric as well. And that's and I think when you have rhetoric and you have substance, I think that those two, only the greats have both of those, I think, and it's really hard to get both, because once you hypothetically know rhetoric, when you can be good with your words and how you're on stage, Christopher Hitchens is a good example, and all these political dictators, there comes a point where you have to really question yourself in your mind and not to anybody else. Hey, look, how far do I want to get good at this rhetoric so I don't have to necessarily admit to things that I think are skeptical, that the things are perhaps unjust to proclaim, but because I can, right? Because I can get away with it and it's believable. How far can I go? And I think, Hitchens did that. I mean, religion poisons everything. When I first read God Is Not Great, I was like, damn, that's a good title. And it is a good title, but is it a true title? And the answer to that is, well, I think no. I don't think it poisons everything. I think it poisons a fair bit. But I think that it also, in some way, whether we can posit paradoxically or genuinely, Mother Teresa, for example, there's debate about how genuine her efforts were. And even if they were genuine, what was the actual objective? What was the motivation of that? And then you could say, well, it was God's kindness in the afterlife. Yeah, it's really hard to go down the route of morality in theism, I think. But the point I'm getting to is, I think that rhetoric is a dangerous tool as well. It is a very powerful one, because Hitchens was a journalist. He wasn't a philosopher, right? He wasn't a scholar. And I think that it was, as I grow a bit older and I look more critically at his work, I'm like, I think he knew, I kind of think he knew that religion doesn't poison everything. I feel like Hitchens, and I'm saying this on a general level, because I think actually, a lot of people have the capacity to do this and may do this. And it's not necessarily an overall bad thing, but I think it is really tempting to fall for one's own rhetoric and kind of proclaim such things with such confidence, because you'll get away with it, and you might get more book sales or whatever. So I think, and William Lane Craig, he has good rhetoric as well, but then the question is, how good is his arguments? The paradoxical thing is, if you don't have any rhetoric, then no one cares. But if you have good arguments and that's it, nobody cares either. And that's, I think, it's a balance you have to kind of have. I mean, would you say in these apologetics, rhetoric is that kind of tool, that they even fool themselves into thinking these things, and it's not genuinely their fault, but it's more kind of, I don't want to say brainwashing, because that's too harsh, I think, of a word. I think when you study something enough, even if it may come across to you as false, you can convince yourself that it is true. And what do you think about that?
I've actually gone on record saying that apologetics is, I was involved in it, just so people know. Like, I had a person who was teaching me who was a student of Norman Geisler. So I, was actively into apologetics and stuff like that. But I think that apologetics are there to convince oneself that what one is believing is sophisticated and true. And then it is used with the rhetoric to convince others. So really, I think what apologetics, and the reason people go out of their way to study it on the level to convince anybody, it's themselves. It is to suppress the doubts they have within on if this is even true at all. And so it is a tool to help that believer enforce their belief through their doubt. No, this is true. Make sure you show yourself that this is true. Convince yourself that this is true. Now, once you're sold on it and you are convinced it is solid, now use that rhetoric that you have to go convince others. And if they start doubting, maybe they'll be good apologists as well to convince themselves and others that it's true. Because there are, like, without a doubt, I don't care if you believe or don't believe, I have Christian scholars who come on. There are so many problems. There are a lot of problems. How we handle those problems is really up to each person, how they're going to deal with it. But when I see these kind of problems and I go, this is inherent problems we find within every religion, that every religion has claims. And they all do the same kind of conclusion that they're right. Theirs is true. Who has the best rhetoric to convince you theirs is better? This is what I honestly think at the end of the day, because when it comes to evidence, honest evidence, no, we do not have good evidence that Jesus rose from the dead. We have literature written by those who believe that Jesus rose from the dead. We only have one person in the entirety of the New Testament who is an eyewitness claimant who said they saw the risen Jesus, and that's Paul. There is no other eyewitnesses, first-person eyewitnesses. One can make the case and try to argue, but none of the Gospels claim it. Well, these are based on people that supposedly know people who are eyewitnesses, or maybe no claim is there, though. You have to assume that. And we don't know who the actual authors of these books are. So when we could make cases to try and say, oh, I think it was Mark because later church father so-and-so says, okay, that's cool. Whatever you want to do to convince yourself. Here we are right back at Apologetics. Right. Okay. And it never ends. It's always like that. And so while I may not have the ticket to the golden land and telling you like, here is what you should replace all your beliefs with, I don't pretend like I have that answer. I think we as humans have what it takes without the religion in order to get there. But I understand that some people don't know how to transition out of that. So I think we're in this in-between phase, though, where humans are, since the Enlightenment, starting to realize, hold on, I've traversed the mountains of religion. And this is what I told my mom and my sister last night at the cookout at her house. My sister and my mom, they believe. They are staunch Christian believers, but we can have these conversations as long as it doesn't go too deep. And I said, Mom, I feel metaphorically like I've just kind of journeyed the mountains of God and the biblical text and things like that. And at the end of this journey, I ran into a mirror. That she's like, you got to seek God. And if you seek God with all your heart and your mind and stuff, you'll find him. Well, I seeked and I have sought and I have dug. And at the end of the day, being honest with the faculties and the senses I have as a human being, I came and ran into a metaphorical mirror. And the mirror was me. It was a reflection of myself. And I realized, oh man, maybe man is the measurement of all things after all, because we are the ones who are the seer. It is through our eyes that we are perceiving the world. Therefore, everything comes right back to us. There's a lot of stuff here to chew on, but
yeah, no, I like how you put that. The mirror, because it relates to me. I mean, I like visiting churches. There's a really good one actually. I moved back to university a week ago. And I visited a church a couple of days ago. And, whenever I visit churches, I'm, in my head, I'm kind of like, hey, look, I'm open. Show me something. And show me something that I will not be able to doubt, like a Cartesian sort of level of conviction, right? Like show me something that I would 99% or something like that be like, hey, that's pretty indisputable. So I'm really open to believing, and this is the thing when I was talking earlier about, I guess the sword being double-edged. It's like, I want to research the topic as an atheist, and that's kind of paradoxical in a way because, many people ask like, hey, why do you study it as an atheist? And we all have different reasons. But for me personally, I think it's half because I'm genuinely infatuated with the subject. But the other half of me in recent years, I guess, when I've put more effort into studying it and I've, not tried to straw man it, I do want God to exist. I would like Christianity to be true, provided, of course, we were to accept benevolence and things like that, like provided those things were to be secured, right? So I'm very open to it. And whenever I visit these churches, I'm in my head sort of like, hey, look, I am very open and I would appreciate it if I had some kind of, like some kind of revelation or something like that. And, the devil kind of thing my Socrates daemon or whatever is kind of like, hey, look, but even if you were shown something, who says that you'd even believe that? And then I'm kind of like, well, and I think Matt Delahanty said this before, it's like, surely God could just reveal himself to everybody individually. And so I'm like, I got you there, right? that's what is going to have to happen. I'm going to have to be shown something that I quite literally can't refute. And so, like you, I guess I'm genuinely open. It's just I'm like, where are you? You know, and I go ahead.
You are so that's the thing. I do believe in something. See, I'm an atheist who believes in something. I believe in us. I believe in what I actually see, experience in the world. So like atheism is a pessimistic term. It always was actually in history. So like Christians were atheists because, well, they only have that one God that isn't visible. So they were getting told by the Roman Empire, you're an atheist to the Christians. Christians were called atheists. And so through history, and you're like, okay, that was a bad term. And it still is. You can see it's like a curse word in the communities online, because if you're an atheist, you don't believe in anything. I do believe in something. I think I always have. And what I was believing in the whole time, by putting it up there on the sky or putting it up there on a God or putting it onto Jesus or whoever, I think it was really us that I believed in the whole time. It's almost like, this is a little fictional, but it's an analogy. Do you remember the movie Interstellar?
Yes, yeah.
All right, you remember Matt McConaughey, okay? The whole time his daughter's like, the ghost keeps visiting her, and the ghost is trying to talk to her. And you're thinking, is it a demon? Is it a God? Is it a spirit? Is it this? Is it that? And he ends up in the black hole at the very end. Actually, when they're going through the wormhole, he sees something. And then, boom, he ends up in the black hole. And what was it the whole time? It was himself trying to speak to his daughter to save planet Earth. It's pure fiction. I get it. But I think that's what we humans are in our thinking, is we need a story. We are creatures that tell stories. In fact, we make up stories in our heads when we tell our friends what happened yesterday. If it's exciting, we know it'll get a thrill out of them if we enhance it a little. And we do it automatically. We don't purposefully lie. In fact, it's not even like a bad thing. It's part of human nature. And so I believe in us. I believe in our story. In fact, when I interviewed Guts at Gibbon on evolution, she said, if you think the Bible, if you think that the myths of these books are the greatest story ever, you should hear about the greatest underdog, the Homo sapien, and how they overcame and rose to the top. She said, that's the greatest story you've ever heard. There's another story to believe in. These are stories. And so there's nothing wrong as being an atheist and believing in something. All we're saying is we don't believe there's like this God thing. I put that in the category of like aspiration, assuming agency where there isn't agency, or at least with no evidence that there is. So I'm not going to say there's an agent being that's like puppet string controlling or even in some way playing with our destiny here on Earth. I don't believe that's literally true in any way. I think I have and you have. And of course, if you get into philosophy, we can talk about cause and effect and all that cool stuff. But my point is, in our perception, it is appearing like we make choices, and these choices seem like we have some say in what's going on. I'll roll with that narrative. I'm not a fatalist. So like, no matter what we do here, I'm going to enjoy it and I'm going to try and make the best of it. So I think we should believe in something and not be complete nihilist. We need to invent in our minds something that helps us wake up in the morning, aspire to something greater, and achieve goals that aren't there. They don't exist yet, but we can make them happen. Why do you think the person who retires and has no ambition dies early? It is inherent in our nature to survive. This is part of the science of knowing ourselves that we need. So religion gives them that, but it's so dogmatic and it's so fundamental in so many people. That's what I think is what poisons a lot of people. I'm not going to say it poisons everything, taking that word literally, but it definitely poisons a lot. And I think that we can come up with new myths. Myths based on the facts. Create our own story.
Yeah.
Why do we need that one?
Fact. Yeah, like as you say, telling a story of what happened yesterday to your friend, it's like, hey, look, there are kind of the axioms of what happened here, but for the sake of entertainment, or these facts in a scientific sense, we can dress them up and make fun out of them, in a sense, like kind of, create meaning around them. I mean, one of my favorite quotes that I've read in a book in the past 6 months was from, I read it in The Denial of Death by Ernest Becker, but it was by Otto Rank. Becker was just referencing him. And Otto Rank said that we are not biological creatures. We are theological creatures. We are meaning machines.
This is theological, even if we can analyze our biology and the science of ourselves. That's why I think there's this disconnect. A lot of people think, oh, well, you just think we're atoms and all these chemical processes that are bouncing around. And it's like, while that may be factual, that may be what's actually in the description of what is the process, what is actually going on. But can you answer the whys? Like give the meaning to it, right? What's the meaning? And that's what Christianity, that's what all these religions are giving people. And I can't give that meaning, but I think I found meaning in myself when I was dying of heroin addiction. See, I was dying, man. I wasn't going to make it. And the Christian answer wasn't working for me. You're a wretch, you're a wicked sinner, fallen, and you need Jesus to save you. And the church did not tell me there is a literal addiction disease, if you will, here. You have a medical condition that's probably biologically and genetically passed down to you in some sense. It's definitely environmentally, because my father was an alcoholic. I needed the science. I needed to know what were the facts. Because then I knew, once I knew the facts, what was going on, I could answer that ethical question about myself. You're not a bad human being. In fact, Derek, you never were. You never were a bad person. You were always a good person. No matter what the fairy tales want to tell you about a woman eating a fruit and God making a man from dirt and them having this fall and they did wrong to the man upstairs, and that you are one of those descendants. No, you are great. You've always been great. And that was what I had to believe to survive. It wasn't, I'm a wretch and I need you, and without you, I'm nothing. That's what I believed for years. It was when I realized you, Derek, you are the man. You are great. You've made mistakes, but understand those mistakes were driven because your literal neurons from your frontal lobe cortex to your midbrain were misfiring because of addiction. When you ingest this drug, it literally becomes part of survival, like sex, water, sleep, and food. It becomes part of how you survive. If you were starving, Derek, would you steal an apple to eat? Yeah. If your family was starving, Derek, would you steal to feed your family? Yeah. If you had to, of course. Yes, I would. Okay. Would you feel bad? I don't know if I would if it came down to minuscule food by Walmart, multi-billionaires running the Walmart industry to feed my family. But my point is, I would do whatever's necessary. That's what ended up happening in addiction. And I realized, okay, hold on. My behavior was based upon the wiring of my brain. How do I rewire my brain? So I started a program called Rewired Addiction. And that's how I got clean. I started to train my behavior to be different, which caused my habits to be different. Long story short, I'm making the point that when we tell ourselves these myths, some people live their whole life going, I'm not worthy and I don't deserve it. And then there are people like me who start to wake up and go, hold on, I've always been worthy. I've always been good. And I believe that that's the case. And that's why I give second chances to people who are drug addicts and don't view them as these horrible cancers to society. I know they don't even mean to be doing the things that they're doing. We're going to look back, bro. If we're alive in 1,000 years, we're going to go, we locked people in cages for 23 hours a day to rehabilitate them. How Neanderthal is that? That's exactly what we're going to think. We're going to look back and go, they ate animals. They ate living animals, conscious beings. Our ancestors were so backwards. And when you read the Bible, there are fragments of fossils where human sacrifice, infant sacrifice is there. You could see where they were offering their children up to God. Now think about it. We look at that and go, how horrific. But if you were back then, would they be thinking like we are thinking right now? I bet you they were. So should we judge the past? No, we should just not repeat it. We should learn from it. And we shouldn't keep practicing these bad ideas. That's why Christianity is successful. It has inspiring philosophy. It has William Lane Craig. It has philosophers who have found ways to make it not mean what it really actually meant in the original context oftentimes, so that it looks like this is something we should still keep today.
Yeah, no, beautifully put. You touched on so many things there. I think, you describe things very, very, very well. I mean, especially, one point about the animal ethics, sort of scene. I mean, I completely agree. I mean, I think it was in Why We Eat Pig, Eat Pigs, Wear Cows, and Love Dogs, I think it is, which is kind of a book on like animal ethics and veganism. And in that book, there's a shocking kind of hypothesis, I guess, or an idea, which is like, if you have grandchildren and they come up to you, right, and they're like, hey, when you were alive, there were other options other than to eat animals, right? I mean, there were substitutes, there were vegetables. You could have like great food with just vegetables, no animal products. And I don't think veganism is devoid of all animals being not harmed. I think that's a myth, and that many vegans don't kind of get on to understand. I mean, veganism does entail animal suffering, but the point is minimizing it, right? So that's a good caveat to remember, I think. But the point is that, do we have other options right now? And the answer to that is yes. And I think it will be
why
very
don't we
difficult.
take them? Why don't we take them?
And I think it'll be very difficult, actually. When you have to turn to these children of who are not born yet, right? In a number of years, and you have to turn to them and say, hey, look, I just like how they tasted, and I just didn't really think about it. I mean, if a slave owner told you that, you probably find it hard to justify. And I don't think I'm not in this kind of presentism perspective. I think, as you kind of alluded to, I think we can understand why people do things in the past, and I don't think they're necessarily held accountable, but it kind of it depends on the details. But I think the problem is that the problem is, like, when people know that something is morally reprehensible, yet they are cognitively dissonant towards it. And I think that is the issue. That's the issue, when you don't do anything about it, even though you know the damage that it causes. So I mean, that was one thing that I thought that you excellently put. I think that was a really good a really good point.
I think that we're heading down this similar path when it comes to Christianity for a lot of atheists. They see it as like morally reprehensible that God would have to kill his own son, or a man named Jesus, on behalf of others who could just take responsibility and redeem themselves, in a sense, or do the right thing in action without having to spill the blood, kill a human being. We talk about killing animals. We want to reduce that. There are options right now. I would even pose the same question that you just said about, we have options other than eating animals, but we still choose to eat animals. We have options other than Christianity. And I don't think we need Christianity in order to make it. However, I don't think most people who are Christians realize that. They were born into a house. I'm using an analogy back to the animal eating. Born into a house where they fed them chicken and eggs and the whole nine, fish, their whole life. They were born, taught by their parents how to eat, the habits they have. It's all they know. Now they have to break out of this habit and try to figure out a world where everything they consume is not going to be an animal. Putting them back onto Christianity. They're born into a house, into a Christian household, or brought into it at a young age, indoctrinated into it, believing that without it, they have no hope, they have no meaning, they have nothing. And then they have an existential crisis when someone brings to them that, hey, Christianity isn't factually true, and there's really good reasons not to believe that this is a true religion. The same kind of argument you bring to Muslims about Islam and Muhammad, the same argument you might bring to the polytheist of Hinduism. Any worldview you can start bringing these issues to. Existential crisis comes in. I can't stop eating the animal. It's all I know. But there are other options. And there is a way to have meaning without having to have Christianity. Just like humans had plenty of meaning well before Christianity,
right.
They will have plenty of meaning, hopefully, when Christianity becomes like Greek mythology and it becomes a thing of the past. And people realize these is a little more complicated because most people think Greek mythology is complete mythology. Like they invented these figures, everything's made up. There are mythicists in Christianity who think that Jesus didn't exist. So they think similar to Greek mythology, this guy's invented, created to kind of explain and give a religion for why the temple was destroyed, replacing the Jewish system and giving people something to hold on to with a mixture of paganism and Judaism. But there are those like me who think there was a guy, and that cognitive dissonance explains why people believed and continue to believe, even when the expectations of what was supposed to be fulfilled and the end never happened. So anyway, the point I'm getting at is like, we're going to look at this. Our science hopefully will develop. People will realize, man, I love her. I love him. I love them. I have meaning in that my relationship with this person. I have meaning in my job. I have meaning in going fishing. I have meaning in greeting people and showing people love. I have meaning going and feeding the homeless downtown. I have meaning. But do I have to have the framework of Christianity in order to have this meaning? That's why people who are atheists call themselves some humanist. But I mean, we might want to broaden that category to include animals, right? So it's like, meaning is, I think, really the driving force. And I did a video response on William Lane Craig's episode recently to a guy named Kyle who was doubting.
Yes, yeah, that's very popular, isn't it? I've seen a few. Yeah, I've seen loads of responses. Yeah,
Apologia, sure. Rationality rules.
Possibly Skeptic, I think, as well.
I don't know if he did. He might have, but I did my response, and I really believe what boils down to the basis, the foundation of what William Lane Craig has going on in his epistemology is his experience. I think that's the foundation to everything, is when he was a teenage boy and he heard that God loved Bill Craig. Yeah. God loved Bill Craig is how he says it.
I remember it. Yeah.
Because guess what? Love is powerful. Love is powerful. And if that doesn't grab you, what will? So this is why the Christian message, you just gotta, don't focus on the gore too much of what happened to Jesus, and try not to think of the problem of evil too much, and try to just have faith, believe in Jesus and stick to the truth. In fact, blessed are those who don't see yet still believe, in the Gospel of John to Thomas. Why? I think this was written by the author on purpose as an apologetic, hoping that the reader who's reading this, that won't ever see Jesus appear to them and have them feel his hands and his side and whatnot, and saying to them, hey, reader, blessed are you for not seeing and still believing. To give them believe no matter what. And that is the drive. I hear a lot of Christians who start to have doubts, like Kyle, the guy, I had conversations with him already, and I misunderstood him a bit in his question initially, but we talk now. He's a Christian. He's into philosophy hardcore. He's asking interesting questions, but the questions I hear these philosophical Christians ask are really divorced from the context of the original manuscripts and what like most of this wouldn't even have mattered to most of the Christians in history and in the original context that the literature was written in.
Yeah, I mean,
I rabbit trailed through a lot of different. There's so much to cover and discuss.
Yeah.
It's just like,
I'm
spilling all sorts of stuff, you know.
Well, something that I kind of, I mean, we've kind of talked about it slightly here, and it's the effect that apologists have on not only theists but also atheists. And I'm sure Frank Turek is ingenuous. I hope he is, and I hope William Lane Craig is ingenuous. Though when they talk about morality and how atheists are devoid of it and they can't, they don't say, of course, that atheists can't be good. They just say they can't justify it. Of course, sure, and that's a nuance that we should always remember. But the way that they write about atheism is extremely devoid of any kind of understanding that they can find meaning and genuine meaning, and as much as it means to them, at the very least. Mm-hmm. And when I've read William Lane Craig and Frank Turek, the way that they talk about morality every single time, it really is irritating, because they paint it as if it's this kind of impossibility to live your life in any honest way as an atheist, because, as they claim, well, you can't truly be happy because it all means nothing in the end. It's the classic appeal to futility. Mm-hmm. I mean, that above anything irritates me. And when theists might read that, or as I said, atheists, if they haven't necessarily looked into the topic as deeply, and they haven't read more people around the subject, they might genuinely believe that.
It's almost like if we threw it back at them, which this would be a straw man, because not all theist Christians think this way. But if I said to Christians, well, you can't genuinely assume that you're really justifying your morality apart from the fact that you just don't want to go to hell. So the real reason that you're actually doing anything good is just selfish intention in your end. Your end is that we don't want to go to hell. We don't want to be killed by God. Now, universalists might say, oh, no, we think everybody's going to go to heaven or whatever, right? But then you have a different problem, right? So how can you justify using things like Pascal's wager? You can try, but the wager isn't as intense, because at the end of the day, I'm going to end up where you are, and we're cool. Like, even if I'm wrong, at the end of the day, sure, I might have a little suffering, but I almost would rather learn through that suffering and actually know, hey, maybe I gained something through that. And at the end of the day, I might have learned more than you did by my experience of not having just blind faith in assuming this is true. I don't know. I mean, who knows at the end of the day? But I wouldn't want to strawman all Christians. You're doing moral things, and really, you don't really intrinsically do good for being good. You're doing it at the end because man, if I don't do these things, Christ will cut me off. Paul says in Romans 9-11 that, to the Gentiles, listen, if God cut the Jews off, right, temporarily, he can graft them in at any time onto the olive branch or the olive tree. You can be cut off. So make sure you are acting in accordance with Christ. Oh, I don't want to be cut off. Therefore, let me make sure I feed my neighbor, because Paul said, make sure you feed me, and then make sure you do this. Oh, I'm going to do all these good things so that I get rewarded. Is Mother Teresa doing the same thing? Is she justified? Show me where hell exists. Prove to me that the place called hell exists. So the same thing can be flipped around on us. Okay, you don't have this, I almost want to say, metaphysical foundation for meaning and purpose and morality. Therefore, nothing's moral. I almost want to take it into a different category and say, James, if, listen, if you're suffering, man, if you don't have let me reverse this. If you're suffering, man, you should suffer more. You should actually try to suffer all you can. Why? Because he who loves this life will lose his soul, but he who loses this life will gain in Christ. So it's good that we all actually suffer and purposefully put ourselves in the worst kind of situations we can, so that we are carrying our cross like Christ. What if every Christian actually listened to the New Testament? I should title a book that one day. What if every Christian actually followed the words of the New Testament? What kind of Christianity would that look like? Martyrdoms everywhere, all day long.
Well, I can be sure I'll be on that book as soon as you publish it.
Right?
Great title, though. I mean, maybe that's a possibility. I think I've been reading. I got this recently. Paranormality by Richard Wiseman. It's all about the paranormal and from a skeptic's perspective. Like, how would you approach these topics of OBEs, out-of-body experiences and near-death experiences, and I guess you could even say kind of magic tricks and things like that. Like, where does it come from? Where, tarot readings and things like that. And what's interesting is that the correlation is, of course, that all of these kind of things, there's an element of it being vague, right? Open to interpretation. What's happening is, by definition, almost slippery. It's very hard to pin down, right? And that's where we should be dubious when a text, like the Old Testament, or the texts like the Old Testament or the New Testament, when there are vagaries, or when there are these slippery moments where the Gospels, for example, aren't consistent with one another, agreeing on the genealogy of Jesus, for example. I mean, that's a funny one. But it's like, it's really telling to me, and I study psychology at university right now, and it's like I'm seeing through all of these things. But the thing is, the unfortunate thing is, you have to know what to see and what to spot in order to see and spot it. Like, you have to have this predisposition of skepticism, which I think as human beings, we don't necessarily have. I mean, like we discussed earlier, we're meaning creatures. Mm-hmm. We're not biological creatures. We are theological creatures. When we see meaning, we grasp to it, right? I mean, it's...
Even if it's nothing, doesn't mean anything. Yes. I mean, what do they interview the little kids and they say, why do rivers exist? So boats can float down them. Really? That's why a river exists? I mean, you would rather say maybe water from the oceans carved out a particular location due to whatever the science is. We don't gravitate to the fact or the science. We gravitate to meaning. And how does this apply to us? Or our perception of animals. So animals can swim in it and have fun, or, something like that. But
yeah, it's that is one major element of, I think, scriptures in general. I mean, the Quran, personally, I wasn't so much of a fan of the Quran. I just felt like it was kind of an amalgamation of the Old and New Testament and paganistic, sort of, there we go.
I just got this A.J. Drudge, a new annotated translation of the Quran. But it's an English translation for an academic setting. Anyway.
I like the cover. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. Anyway, this came in yesterday, so.
Yeah, that looks cool. So, I mean, the Quran, I wasn't really impressed with it. I mean, I want to give credit where credit's due. Like, I didn't read it as a scholar would have read it, and I didn't read it with as much knowledge as I have wanted to. But my first impressions, my instincts from what I've learned in psychology and of course philosophy and my skepticism, I was just like, this feels even more obvious to me that it's man-made. Like, right. That is the honest, genuine truth of my first impressions when I was reading it. Like, and I admit I didn't read it at the time as a scholar of the text. I didn't read it with that level of sophistication. But my instinct was, there's something strange about this. It just doesn't feel like a divine entity would do this, and it doesn't feel like there would be any element of doubt or anything like that. It would be instinctively self-evident almost. I mean, we were talking earlier as well about, like, Why wouldn't God want to show himself to us more? And the apologetics is like, well, it's all about thinking critically. It's all about, reading the Bible and analyzing it all your life, and then kind of understanding how deep it all is by the end. And, and every scholar of, the Quran or the Old or the New Testament would say that, right? But I mean, there's quite a dedication, It is quite the amount of dedication that takes. And many people have done it, and not too much of a conclusion as well. I mean, people have done it who are atheists.
Mm-hmm.
And this is just the main issue, isn't it? It is, why is God so hidden? Yeah.
I mean, it's funny that we have the category God, and this God has attributes that we have in many cases. Even when you get to Islam, which certain versions of Islam actually have God that has a body. He has body. Like his body parts, he sits on a literal throne, things like that. Right. But there's debates even within Islam, like different versions of Islam that are like, God has a body. And then other places like, God is so unbelievably beyond our comprehension that like we can't even pretend to try and describe and explain. And when we start getting off into those, it makes me chuckle. It honestly makes me like, and you're supposedly somehow like there's revelation that actually like you can somehow know this deity. You just pretty much told me we can't know about this God.
Yes, exactly.
And then we can know about this God through a messenger 1400 years ago in a cave by an angel Gabriel, when he himself, according to the hadith and like later literature, that he himself didn't even think this was divine and even thought it was Satan, or it was like a devil, and it was his first wife who helped him calm him down and pretty much explained to him like, no, this is God. It's from God. Because they had certain kind of superstitions that angels, or is it demons? I can't remember what the particular, it may not be demon. It may have been a jinn. I'm not sure, but They can't be around when women are nude. So like she exposes herself with him on her lap, according to one of the narratives. And because she's nude and this thing is still around, according to Muhammad, he's experiencing something. Therefore, it can't be a jinn or whatever the demon is, because they can't be around nude women. This is like when you sneeze, you're letting out spirits, or like kind of a superstitious old idea that humans have. And it's as man-made as you can possibly think. It's clever how we think this way, but I think we connect dots to things that aren't really connections. This is where parallelomania comes in, but also the idea that in the ancient world, if you and me were, agricultural harvesters, we planted crops, agricultural, whatever, we would observe the heavens to know when to plant, try to get our calendars figured out, at least to know about what time of the year to plant, what time to reap what we've sown. And every year around springtime, Venus rises, okay? And when we watch the earth, fertility, all of this sex and birds and the bees and the plants are growing and greenish everywhere, this star seems to, planet, if you will, appears at a certain place in the sky, and it comes up out of nowhere. And then next thing you know, we realize, you know what? It's that God, Venus, that's bringing us life, that's giving us these gifts. And you just connected dots because you observed a pattern, and the pattern became more. What is this? If we study evolution, if we study human nature, we study the animal kingdom. I like Michael Shermer's book, The Believing Brain, where he goes and shows you the pattern recognition system in our brains and how we give meaning and patterns. And in fact, they did a test on humans and animals to see which ones, were more superstitious. Humans were far more superstitious than animals are, because of our brain being layered with so many more complexities. I mean, we're cognitive of our own realities in a sense, right? We are observing and we're asking questions animals aren't. We're doing things a little beyond that in our evolution. It actually has created more of a complexity to our superstition. So we are narrative pattern-seeking animals that are out here philosophizing ancient, archaic books that really aren't sophisticated on that level. In fact, this is why I do what I do. There are times in the Bible where it pins down an idea and it says, this is the way the world is and the universe and everything, while the Greeks already discovered the cosmology is globe Earth, or they have figured out things that we know to actually be closer to the reality of truth with our modern science than the Bible did. And the Bible doubles down. So the Bible is the truth and this is the word of God? No, this is the word of men. This is the word of humans, just like all religions. And what they've done is they've painted nature, their perception of the world around them, these mysteries. Now we just do the same thing. God's not really the reason. He's not angry at us for why the volcano's erupting, tectonic plates. However, there might be some hidden meaning on why your aunt gets cancer. Because did somebody sin, or is this just a plan where God's testing people? Is this a Job scenario where he wants to kill 10 of his kids? In the end, it says that he got all of it back. Does that mean God brought all of his kids back from the dead? Or does that mean like Job had more babies and like, what's going on in the story? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of this is, we have this saying like, fake it until you make it. Well, in this scenario, it's make it until you fake it. Make it up to such a stature, like such of a high level of respect, an apologetic, if you will. Mm-hmm. Put it up to such a pedestal. Make the pages golden, right? Get only the most intelligent monks to transcribe it. Treat it like it is divine, and maybe you will believe it is, even if you're the one. Let alone the people who aren't in charge of this, practical application of doing this, preparing it in the Bible or these texts in such a way. But even as the person doing this, putting these kind of things in motion, making the gold, the pages gold, and making the font fancy, right, and kind of reciting it in this kind of like, this Islamic kind of respect where they try and make it as divinely sounding as possible, which I've never really found that to be very convincing. The whole argument that when you recite the Quran, you can kind of feel how divine it is. Well, funnily enough, the recitations that I have listened to, it really does seem to me that somebody has definitely tried to make it sound better than it really is. Mm-hmm. Like, I've never got that argument. Like, what if you said the Quran, in some silly voice? Would it then still sound divine? Funnily enough, in the videos on YouTube and when Muhammad Hijab did it with Jordan Peterson, like, funnily enough, they all do it in this very kind of like divine, attractive tone, and that's because they are trying to in some sense make something better than what it might be. And that I think is at the face of all of this. It is really dressing up a turd, perhaps.
I mean, I think that music is like one of the more powerful, if you will, philosophical instruments that really it goes right into the subconscious without you having to consciously digest a lot of it through sound and meaning and value in that. And I can listen to songs that I feel like, wow. Like when I was in church, I believed I was experiencing the divine. When I would have certain words from the Bible or meanings from stories or music during worship. Now, as an atheist, I'm cruising down the road and I will slap on a good song and I feel majestic. I feel like it's divine.
Yeah.
Because it is. It is. And we are the ones who are interpreting this. This doesn't mean that it literally is divine. I'm simply saying it is amazing. There's like the same experiences I had as a Christian and the feelings that I had as a Christian. I realized, man, I have the same feelings today. All I did was just take God out of the picture and I'm still feeling amazing about a great song. or a good movie with a good meaning that comes out of it, or a message or a story. I still cry when I watch someone who's giving to the poor, some poor guy on a video on a TikTok or on a Facebook thing, even if it is a Christian who actually does it and goes, God bless you, man. Here's $1,000. I want to see you off the streets. And when it's a Muslim and I see a Muslim go up and feed another Muslim in a Muslim country, why is it that I can relate to every one of these worldviews and I get something from every single one of them and see there's a pattern here? This is a human thing that we can do as humans. So I think we should cherry pick. I think we should see what's good about Christianity. Okay, there's kind of a self-sacrifice concept there. It's like helping the poor, helping the people who are downtrodden. We need to pay attention to them, because versions of like Hinduism that have caste systems where the rich are rich and the poor are poor for a reason, it's meant to be that way. Nah, we want to break that down. I don't like the caste system. I like the idea of helping the poor. Let's borrow that idea that isn't original to Christianity, but it is kind of capitalized. See, there were philosophers before this in the Greek world who did pay attention and want to help the poor. But then there were philosophical ideas who thought the most moral and the best decision you can make in your life is to get rid of all your goods and be poor. So why are we trying to help people who want to be poor if they were trying to do that? If that's their mission, are you harming them in their worldview because really they want to be poor? They want to rid themselves of need like Buddha and say, I want nothing. In fact, I desire to have no desire or want. You know, is that their goal? And are you doing their religion wrong by trying to give them something that they don't want? Maybe their goal is to be empty, and your goal is to have fullness. Maybe they find fullness in emptiness, and maybe you find emptiness in fullness. I don't know. My point is like perception, it's subjective. There's so many things here, and we need to try and, I don't know, cooperate the best we can. I'm not a fan of tribalism, but I know it's inherent in us. That's why I have a distaste for politics. I really feel it's another religion wrapped up. It's like I get such a bad taste in my mouth when I hear like what's going on with politics. And I know it's dealing with real world matters, but it's like, geez, I feel like we're in biblical Canaanite versus Israelite times. We need to conquest them. Like it feels that way to me when I'm seeing it. So anyway, sorry for that.
Yeah, I mean, no, really, really relevant, and as always interesting. It's politics is interesting because I always remember Niccolo Machiavelli's quote that is, morality has no relation to politics. And it really is a cutthroat world out there in politics. I mean, you know, in England, I don't watch like the inner parliament sort of videos, the kind of live streaming of the prime minister sort of talking at times. I mean, I do occasionally, but I tend not to like to do so because they act like children because they have this stature, this status, and they can abuse it, and they do, right? And so I'm put off by politics as well. Although that doesn't stop me from being interested in it as well as religion and things like that. I do want to ask you, do you think religion is something that we can outgrow?
I think, like everything that evolves over time, it becomes something else. I think that religion, we have to first try to understand what the phenomena is. It is a large group of people or a group of people who have kind of a common goal, aspiring to believing in common traditions, common aspirations, beliefs, gods, whatever it might be. And I think that religion is evolution playing out in humanity. Is it a wrong turn and gone too far? Maybe we've gone a bit too far in putting so much onto agency we have no evidence for. But like I said earlier, if you wake up and you tell yourself you're great, is there any empirical data to like know that inherently? Like, is there like, put this in make sure you put this in that lab jar and add the chemicals and you'll see how great you are.
Right.
No, you tell yourself a story.
Yeah.
You believe your story. and you go out to prove to yourself, same thing Apologetics does, but to prove to yourself that you are great and to help others so they understand that you're great and how to be a good person to help other humans, right? These are moral goals. These are my fundamental morals, right? Like I'm pointing out mine as an atheist. So religion to me is observation of natural phenomena to begin with. They're trying to make sense of the world around them. They assume agency. The reason lightning struck, well, they didn't do it. Humans didn't do it. Some power greater than us did it. And they don't know why the lightning bolt struck down. They don't know why the earthquake happened. They don't know why people die of diseases or famines. You'll hear in the Bible, it talks about the angel of the Lord came. What's that mean? I don't really know. God must have done this. But there's people who died of worms or they died of this COVID-19.
Yeah.
You know, and my point is like, it's explaining the world around us, but in a tribalistic sense where we have a common goal and they've grown over time. So I do think that religion will evolve further and it will not look like this in the next, I would say at the rate we're going with our learning and stuff like that, give it a couple hundred years and we might be a little blown away on even how Islam looks. Fingers crossed. Because there's a lot of backwards thinking there as well. In certain regions of the world, they're just now starting to do things that you'd like, thank you. Saudi Arabia and things like that are like starting to kind of do things more progressive in some way. I hope it doesn't revert back to fundamentalism, but I think we would outgrow what we call religion right now. But if the question is, will we outgrow tribalism? I don't know if we can. I think we'd probably be extinct before we know how to do that because, like I said, those people are anti-Muddites and those people are Muddites. It's how we categorize things. Mm-hmm. We look at people. Are they our color? Do they speak our language? Do they look like me? This is
them.
Huh?
Yeah. Us versus them.
Yeah. Us versus them automatically, or at least you're already suspicious if they aren't like you. So there's a prejudice built in, and I think this is an evolutionary mechanism. It's natural when you walk and you see a snake on the ground. Whoa, hold on, what? Like you're prejudiced to that snake in terms of it possibly harming you. And I think this happens also with humans. They don't look like me. I had a bad experience with people who look like them in the past, and in any category humans live in, tribalism's there. But religion, I think, will take on new areas over time. I don't know how else to put it. I wish I could predict it. I just hope that our children and our children's children in the next 1,000 years will have mercy on us and have us willingly say, we know that we are ignorant right now. We know that. And when you look back, hopefully you look back with mercy and realize we aren't pretending to know. See, those in those ancient books, they know. They have the answers. We want to learn from our fathers, from our ancestors, from the history books, that when they were dogmatic and they knew, we should be cautious in realizing how little we know. But we know enough to know they don't really know. And so hopefully our children will look back and with what they do know, go, those were some wise people. They were trying with the little fickle brains they had and in the world they lived in to get this. That's my hopes.
Yeah, and then they were aware of the issue, and because of that, were they even more motivated to ensure that, whatever it might be, they just tried at least with this knowledge to make things better than not better. As a final two questions, the last one won't be too long, but the next one, how do you view life and death, and how do you deal with the fact that you are mortal? What are you afraid of death? How do you deal with that reality that you will die?
So when I was a Christian for all those years, I psyched myself out into the narrative, into believing that if I die, that's fine. I'm going right to heaven. Like, and I didn't have fear of death. Like, I wasn't afraid to die. Now that I'm not a Christian, I think about it all the time, and I am afraid of death. I am afraid of how am I going to die? Is it going to hurt? That's mainly the main point. I'm not afraid of after. Like, I've posed this to people, like, what's it like before you were born? You remember that? And they're like, no, I don't remember before I was born and how it felt. Me neither. Simple as that. Because they're like, what do you think happens to you after you're dying? I'm like, I always ask the question immediately. I don't care who it is, where I'm at. I was on a podcast one time on a radio show. They're like, what do you think happens to you when you die? And I go, well, what was it like before you were born? And they were like, well, no, I was asking you the question. I know, I'm asking you to give you your answer. And they're like, oh, nothing. I'm like, that's what I think happens after. But in this life, because I am a conscious creature who experiences things, I'm terrified of what it might be like. And am I going to suffer? I worry about if I need to take care of my body more now. Like, I'm worried about making sure I don't have cancer. I want to make sure that I try to do good. I need to try and go and get into physical education more in terms of going to the gym, going on a run. I want to take care of my body as much as possible. But Derek, you have no ultimate meaning. So why don't you just kill yourself? I mean, you hear some Christians who think that about atheists, but no, I am afraid of dying. It's the fear of the pain ultimately,
right?
Because I've had enough pain in my life with addiction. That's the only thing.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No, I think I'd like to ask that question because, to anybody that I can, because I feel like it's a really important question because our death is arguably as important as our birth, right? And I think that attitudes toward death that are secular, I think it's important to listen to different perspectives on death because, there are people out there who may have just deconverted and they're like, I die and that's it. I don't get to see my loved ones. I don't get to see my family, my pets even. Like that's one thing that really bugs me about it's a big issue, I think. It's because theism in some sense doesn't teach people how to grieve properly. That's a major issue for me. Like when people deconvert, all those existential insecurities just come down like rocks. It's pretty harsh, right? And in myself as well, I'm the same as you in the sense that I do think about it maybe every day in some capacity, and I think that it's something that needs to be thought about carefully, because I think you could probably agree that the more that you think about it, whilst there's a limit to how much you ought to, but I think there's also a balance. Like, if you remember your mortality, then you are more aware of what you do in the present and how important it is to spend it wisely.
You bring up something really deep here. And I remember as a Christian, you brought this memory up about how I really didn't fear death because I honestly believed that I was living, that this was like, I'm trying to put it like a simulation in a way, but I'm not trying to get lost into that. That's not my point. Like, God pretty much destined everything to happen and that I was one of his chosen. I believed I was chosen of God. Therefore, like, I did not think for a moment that it was my time and that any time was my time. I haven't died yet, and I've had a lot of close encounters. I've survived those. So obviously I'm not going to die anytime soon. I'm going to have a long life. I had no fear. And I wonder if that is like just this psychological narrative that I had in my head where it was like, I'm going to be able to be fine no matter what I go into, no fear of death, because I won't die. I really believed I wouldn't die. And I think this shocks a lot of Christians who find out a very Christian person in their life died from some out of nowhere car wreck, or they just don't wake up, or they have cardiac arrest, or they have a stroke, or like anything happens. And then they're like, and then they have to suffer with that doubt that hits them like, is there a God? Because it's like God was supposed to be taking care of me and protecting me and watching over my life. Like, why did this happen? And then they're even more traumatized trying to explain what just happened that shouldn't have happened. And I think every Christian in some sense thinks they're a chosen child of God, even if you don't take a predestinarian approach. So God would take care of, right? God works all things together for the good to those who love him. And this is Romans chapter 8. So we believe that like God will only do good. You know, if a child asks for bread, will he give him a stone? You know, you think in this manner, and I think I was kind of tricking myself in believing this, that none of this stuff would happen. But now I take serious that I'm not like living in this. I could run in front of a train right now and I'm so chosen by God that the train would derail before it would even hit me. Or it's impossible for me to die in my mind. No, like I know my mortality even more now, to the point where I'm conscious about my decisions that I make and the kind of choices I make in the world that I live in, and the repercussions and impact that I have on my children, my wife, how I treat them. Like I can't, this is it, you know, make it the best it you can have. And in fact, I got a parable for you before you get me to the last question. There's a wise man named James, and he's journeying through the wilderness as he's pondering on his past, his present, and his future. A lion comes out from behind a bush and begins to chase James. And as James is running away from this lion, and he looks back, the lion's getting closer. He keeps running faster, and he looks back, and it's even closer. And as he's running, he just feels like he knows that that lion is about to get him by the heel. And he feels it touching his heel as he's turning back, and it's about to get him. He starts falling off the edge of a cliff. And he's sliding down the edge of a cliff, and he's just reaching to try and grab something to hold on to. Finally, there's a root hanging out, and he grabs onto the root. As he's hanging off the edge of this cliff that he was falling off of, he's looking up, and there's that lion prowling back and forth, ready to devour James. And he's thinking, oh my gosh, I can't climb back up there. It's going to kill me. So he looks down, and there's a lion at the bottom of this cliff looking up, prowling back and forth, ready to devour him. So in that moment of pain, he's hurting. He realizes he feels a cold feeling running down his arm, and there's blood that's been running down his arms. And on that root, there were thorns, huge thorns that were inside of his hands now, because he's gripping the only thing that keeps him from being killed by the lions. And he's looking down at the thorns where the blood's dripping. There's a blackberry. And at that one moment, for whatever reason, James just bit into the blackberry. And it was the best blackberry James ever had. The end. Now, the moral of the story is the lion at the top was his past. The lion at the bottom is his future. And if you focus on them, not only are you terrified, but you don't gain anything from it. And even though it hurts sometimes in the now, usually there's always a blackberry that we can try to find in the toughest moments of our life. And I heard this from a Buddhist, and I thought to myself, you know what? I'm going to eat the blackberry, and I'm going to try to find the blackberry as much as I can as a human, if I can remember. So don't dwell too much on your past, and don't focus too much on your future. It's not promised, you know, but right now, what can you do that makes you the best you can possibly be? If that's the myth you believe, I think we have a chance. How can I be the best human and help other humans become the best human so that we have something great that we're living in? If you're so focused on, I don't have existential metaphysical meaning, then you might as well be a nihilist, or just BS yourself into believing some religion because you simply can't cope with reality and how difficult life is. And I don't know how to help people, you know, with that. So,
well, I love the parable. It's I've never heard it before. It's very thought provoking. I mean, and I do think it is propaganda to some extent when that kind of thing is posited. You know, again, you can't have any meaning, any sense of genuine reality that you can have control of. You know, that's what the apologists often try to say in some cases. So the last thing I want to ask is book recommendations. What are your top 3 or anything you can think of at the top of your head, like anything you've read recently? What would you recommend?
Well, I'm not a philosophy guru, and I'm not saying at some point I won't be. Right now, it's like I'm a historical, let me study what's going on. And my main focus right now being that it's biblical studies. I am venturing off into Islam. So I've went from Hebrew Bible, Old Testament, extra biblical material, New Testament, and now we're dealing with Islamic material. I suspect at some point I will engage with some of the rabbinic literature over time, but I can only do so much at a time. Really do recommend for like a broad audience who wants to understand the God of the Bible. Mm-hmm. Like you really want to find out, if you're really curious and interested in really knowing like what this God was about, what this God really was seen as to the ancients. And even then, we're trying to pierce through a window of material. So being back then might have helped us understand better. This is a book I would recommend. God and Anatomy. Okay. This book right here, written by Francesca Stavrakopoulou, literally takes you through the anatomy of God, God's actual body parts. And each chapter is named after a body part or a particular area of God that the Bible actually talks about over and over and over. So this metaphysical being outside space and time is fiction. And it was invented by Greek philosophy, not from biblical biblical ancient Near East. This is something that came later in the Hellenistic period with this God that is just, Platonic deity that is the highest form, and it's monotheistic. It's a single God, the most supreme being of all. That's stuff that came late. And I'll just read you a couple of these to tease you.
Sure. Yeah.
So Dissecting the Divine, an introduction, right? Part 1, Feet and Legs. And this is the subtitles to that chapter. Grounded, footloose, sensational feet. Part 2, Genitals. Phallic masculinities, perfecting the penis, divine sex. Now, this God of the Bible, we have Canaanite literature where the God El, the supreme deity, Father God, the God of Jesus, if you want to get technical, had sex with other goddesses and birthed children. He had a wife. Yahweh had a wife, Asherah. Like when you dive into this, you realize real quick what you're dealing with. And you go, well, then what are they preaching at Sunday school? Like, what is the church telling us today? Part 3, Torso, back and beyond, inside out, from belly to bow. Part 4, Arms and hands, handedness, arms reach, divine touch, holy handbooks. Part 5, Head, face to face, headstrong, beauty. Profile, sense and sensitivity, grasp and gulp. And then the epilogue to the book is An Autopsy. And it's an autopsy of God is dead. But because God is like a big human. And in fact, the people who killed God unknowingly are those who actually replaced God with a non-corporeal being. They have made God into something God never was. They killed him. He was a real hands-on God who had children, that had sons of God, literally birthed, like the whole nine. And the story of God is actually more fascinating when you look at it from this perspective than it is this being that's just beyond, and it's like a mind, and it's like what is it? Whatever your imagination can come up with, as long as certain attributes are applied to him, like omnibenevolence, or, like this God didn't omnibenevolent anything. This God hated and loved. This God was jealous and happy. This God went to war and wanted peace. This God was a bigger reflection of the men who wrote these texts. And I love this book. So I would recommend anybody go on Audible. If you can't read a lot of paper, you can listen to the book be read.
Awesome. Yeah, no, I it's funny because I'm aware of your discussion on the book, which you posted really recently. I really want to check that out. I mean, as I said at the beginning, like, you have so many videos, and like, it's, as I said, I really do find it commendable how you have so much content, but all of it is just so interesting, and it's just so deep. And I apologize for not being up to date with that one.
No, there's too many.
But I really, no, I saw that you had a discussion on the book with the author. I won't even try to say her second name. I haven't learned how to pronounce that yet. But I really like her. I've seen her on, what was it, like, the big question, I think it is. I'm a fan of her. But yeah, no, it's funny because I picked it up. And I was like looking at it because of your, I saw your discussion. I was like, yeah, it does look really cool. So it's a weird coincidence that, but I won't put any divine attributes to that coincidence.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, thank you for recommending the book. I personally will check that out. I have so much to read, but I definitely want to check that out as well. So yeah, thank you for coming on the channel to talk with me. It's been a really, there's been so many topics here, and so much to digest. I think for the both of us after, and for the audience to really kind of grapple with all of these issues. Let's be honest, all of these issues that are rife in theology and philosophy, and apologetics, and the fact that we are mortal creatures, striving for some ounce of meaning. I think the whole topic is fascinating. So thank you once again for featuring on the channel.
Yeah, I'll just end on a positive note and say, if whatever you're believing in right now, or whatever it is that you hold to, isn't working for you, if atheism drives you to nihilism, if theism is making you feel like I'm not being honest, or I just don't think this fits the data, if agnosticism or whatever the position is, I tell people as an atheist, find whatever works for you and makes you a better individual and gives you meaning and purpose and happiness to help other people, all of that. I would much rather our goals line up in a humanistic sense, as a humanist, no matter what you believe at the end of the day. So if you're an atheist and you're struggling with existential nihilism, whatever it might be, become a theist, become agnostic, become a pantheistic, try to find whatever it is that gives you purpose and meaning in life. And that's the same goes for those who might be in different areas. If atheism is something you need to try it. Mind you, you can always change your mind. Just keep that in mind. I can always change my mind, and nobody can tell me otherwise. So thanks for this interview, man.
It's been a pleasure, and I love what you just said there. It feels like there's a lot of pressure, to kind of stick with one and only one. But actually,
right.
I'm all for trialing out ideas, and that's okay. It's okay to admit that something that you believed 5 years ago is false because you've looked into it more, right? I mean, I feel like there's a lot of pressure nowadays to stick to your guns, but actually it's not being a hypocrite. It's just demonstrating that you're learning. You're on a journey. So I think your message is extremely powerful there. Thank you so much, Derek.
Thank you, my friend.
Hopefully see you soon at some point and discuss something else. Yeah.
I'm down.